All right, hello everyone. We're just going to give some more time here for a few more folks to show up, and then we'll get started shortly. Okay, let's just get started here. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Phase 2.2 closing ceremony. We're going to be running these every month just as a way to celebrate the finishing of each phase in the competition, and just a time to go over the phase that we just passed, and then where we're going to be heading going forward. So for today, again, we'll just kind of start with a congrats to everyone. We'll do a little overview of the total storage and the deal progress. From there, we'll transition into phase 2.2. So we will have Dinesh. He will be talking about the judging and the reward winners. And then we will do a Slingshot 2.3 overview, where Pooja will be taking us through where we're going to be taking Slingshot over the next few months. And then we will finish off with a live Q&A here. So if you have any questions, feel free to stick around and we'll be here to answer them. So again, congrats on completing phase 2.2. We had a really successful phase. As you see from the graphs here, a huge spike in data, which is really awesome to see. So congrats to everyone. It's really promising and exciting to see the competition continuously grow every month. So again, huge kudos to everyone, and let's keep this going forward. So next, we've been adding some really cool new data sets, and it's something we're going to do continuously. So recently we added some data sets on climate data, an audiobook collection, an encyclopedia of DNA elements, and we have about a total of almost 65 other full data sets and lots of data in there to be stored and to be explored. So do encourage you to check that out. And if you have any recommendations for data sets that you think would be a good fit for the competition, definitely let us know. You can submit an issue in the Slingshot GitHub repo, and we will definitely take a look at it and yeah, make sure it's a good fit for the competition. So, Dinesh.
Perfect. Thanks, Jason. So thanks again to all the contributors for Slingshot Phase 2. We had over 45 participants this round, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the judging process as well as some tips to continue to evolve your submissions as we go to more and more phases of the Slingshot competition. So first I wanted to talk a little bit about documentation. So as you know, documentation for providing this data so that other individuals in the ecosystem can download and use this data is a really important part of Slingshot. It's one of the primary mandates for the competition. And we've seen some kind of issues in a few projects. I wanted to kind of reiterate some tips to continue to make your documentation better. One is always remember to publish the reference data source, right? The credibility of where is this data from. Sometimes it's through a government organization, sometimes it's through Amazon or Google, sometimes it's through another authentic source. So you don't need to duplicate the documentation from the source, but it's really important to know that this information came from a source that somebody can actually go ahead and validate and see that that's the data that they actually want. So that's number one. Number two is make sure to provide a usable directory to find not only the CIDs, but also the miners. The number of people actually reference the Slingshot website and the deals.csv that people uploaded, but that's not really always a valid option. It assumes that the Slingshot website will be available, which may not always be true, or maybe in a different form from the original directory. It's also a little bit tricky to use a Slingshot website in order to find a particular CID or a particular file, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. As an idea, some teams actually built graphical user interfaces to find a particular segment of the corpus of data. Some provided thumbnail previews. You don't need to get super fancy. You could also do something like what other teams did, is actually to submit a GitHub repo. So they actually created a markdown file or created a set of files that actually provided a directory that they could search through or download or clone in order to get the directory and all the details in a way that they could actually search and really make this data usable. Couple other things that made retrieval specifically challenging is, as you know, really large files often need to be split up into multiple chunks. And so when a data source is larger than 32 gigs or 64 gigs, larger than a sector, it's very common practice to split those up. And a number of teams did that very successfully. But from a usability side, how does the user actually reassemble those files? Some documentations were clearer than others, but something to really pay attention to. If I don't actually know the format of the file or how many pieces there are, how do I reassemble these, right? If it's split up into 8 files, but I only download 6 of them, how do I actually make sure that I have the entire contents of the file? Is that through a hashing strategy? Is that through another strategy? In addition, sometimes I might find that a miner is undialable. So how do I find alternative miners for a particular piece of content? And then on the flip side is that's for really large files. There's also the case when you're retrieving small files. Sometimes files are a few K or a few megabytes, and those are actually combined into a archive or a tar file. And that's a really common strategy, makes a lot of sense, but how does the user find out which archive is a particular song or the particular graphic that I'm interested in? So just broad tips to make usability of the documentation. In general, the documentation was really good. We saw dramatic improvements from phase 1 for 2.1 and 2.2, but want to continue to reinforce the idea that it's great if the data is stored, but it's even better if it's usable and retrievable. So let's go into the judging side of it. We actually looked at the submissions from 4 different vantage points, and I wanted to go through the details so teams understand what judging criteria was used. The first was deal validation. This is actually purely an automated process where we're actually only counting the first 10 copies as per the rules for submitted deals. So the same content can't be submitted more than 10 times. And we also negated deals that don't contain a file name. If I have a 16 gigabyte CID, but I don't know the type of file or what that content represents, it's not usable from a content perspective. So that was the actual first check. The second side was actually the documentation validation, which I touched on in a little bit of detail, but really checking for, can a third party independently download and use this data? And so some of the tips from the previous slide touches on the criteria used from that perspective. A third part was actually on retrieval validation. So we spot checked a percentage of the submitted deals in order to make sure that the content was actually retrievable. And in general, retrievability was a challenge. Some miners were not dialable, some were offline, and others failed for a variety of reasons. We recognize that that's not always the Slingshot participants' fault. Sometimes it's other reasons, but Pooja will address this in a little bit more detail. But retrieval is a big mandate of why Slingshot exists, right? We want to provide the world with really, really useful data sets. And how do we, and if it's not retrievable, the intent or the purpose of the competition is heavily diluted. And then the fourth aspect is we did receive complaints from a variety of community members for self-dealing and other misuse of the rules. And so those were analyzed and processed in the judging scoring. So I wanted to comment on that. So really appreciate folks in the community that are actually looking out for each other and raising concerns. And those were addressed as part of the judging process at the end of this particular phase. So from a rewards perspective, we actually awarded over 146,000 fill in phase 2.2. So congratulations for a tremendous amount of work. And as Jason alluded to, the numbers speak for themselves. Really, really rapid increase of storage. Crossed 3 milestones, the 2 petabytes, 3 petabytes, and 3.5 petabytes, which unlocked the vast majority of those awards. There were also booster rewards for all participants in 2.2. And then, as you'll recall, at the end of 2.1, there was actually some teams that actually didn't submit documentation, and so we did have a portion of fill allocated to those teams who did submit documentation at a reduced level, but they did earn a chance to earn some awards. And so those awards are also part of the 146,000 total fill that was awarded in phase 2.2. So congrats to all the teams, and award notifications will be sent over the weekend. Hand it off to Pooja.
Awesome. Thanks, Dinesh. And yeah, congratulations to all of the teams. It's kind of insane to see the growth that happened in really just the last month. So I think everyone's figuring out how to store massive amounts of data on the Filecoin network. We stored so many more petabytes of data this last month than in all the months combined. So great work to everyone there. And so we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the next phase of Slingshot, 2.3, as we've been calling it. And Dinesh covered a lot of this, but we feel like now that it's been a few months that we've been in Slingshot Phase 2, we've learned a lot. The entire community has contributed heavily to storing humanity's most important data sets on the Filecoin network. But we think now is a good time to regroup and see how we're doing against all of the goals that we set out when we started this competition. So if you can go to the next slide, there are a few main goals for this competition. And the first is to, do this work of preserving the most valuable data sets that we know of that are publicly accessible on the Filecoin network. And as we've seen over the last few months, we've totally crushed this goal. There have been several petabytes of really valuable data sets stored on the network. The second goal for this competition, as Dinesh mentioned, is, sorry, I think the slides went away, and maybe, am I the only person who's seeing that? Okay, great. We're back. Thank you. Awesome. So the second goal, as Dinesh mentioned, is about really about retrieval fundamentally. So when we say that we want all of these data sets that are being stored to the network to be accessible and explorable by anyone, that means that anyone at any place in the world at any time should be able to download this data off of the Filecoin network and use it for their projects and their applications. Maybe they want to do their own local analysis on top of the data, or they want to build user-facing applications on top of it, or whatever it is. But the data, just storing it on the network is only one piece of the puzzle, and it's really, really important that people can actually use the data, which has been trickier for a number of reasons. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the ways that we're thinking about addressing this and making sure that the competition is achieving this objective as well. And then the third and fourth goals are about really strengthening the experience of Filecoin storage clients and developers. When we started this competition, it was actually before the Filecoin mainnet launch, and so much has changed in the last few months. Storage deals are much more successful. Overall, just across the board, this competition has been a really powerful force for debugging some of the open issues within the network and client and storage client software as well. So that's been a really amazing thing. And I think that has continued to be a huge source of value for the Filecoin network. And we're really excited to see that continue too in the next phases. So as we have been mentioning, when we think about this goal about making these important data sets accessible and explorable by anyone in the world, some of the common problems that we're seeing include data ingestion and structuring. And so I won't talk about this too much because Dinesh mentioned some of this as well. But some of the architectures that we've seen when people are storing data sets to the network include things like arbitrarily merging files into 32 gigabyte chunks, or taking much larger files or data sets and arbitrarily splitting those into n pieces. And there isn't really, in addition to these pieces, there aren't always indexes that people can use to know what all the pieces are that they need to reconstruct files and so on. And then searching on the Slingshot website alone isn't actually going to solve that need. So that's one common issue that we've seen. Another issue is, when folks will maybe just take these massive data sets and then just chunk them right at the source. And so if someone wanted to actually use any of the data, they'd have to retrieve all of the pieces back out, reconstruct this. In some cases, we've seen 100 terabyte data sets. They'd have to reconstruct the whole 100 terabyte data set in order to unzip it and actually get to the data that's stored within the directory. And so obviously that also is not usable. Most people don't have 100 terabyte machines that they just have sitting around, to recombine different pieces of data and so on. And so that's kind of another architecture that we've seen that isn't particularly effective. Okay, I think we got a screen share drop again, but maybe I can share my screen potentially. Let's see. Okay, can folks see that? Okay, awesome. Thanks. Okay, so a few other common issues that we've seen. So I think, the Filecoin network has many different kinds of CIDs, and there may be some confusion about what different CIDs represent. We've seen some folks, when they're uploading their deal information, they upload deal IDs, which are the CIDs that are prefixed with BAFY. And so that is not quite the same thing as a payload CID. So people can't actually use these CIDs to retrieve the data back out of the network. It's not the correct CID. So that's kind of one issue. The other is when folks have uploaded piece CIDs, which are prefixed with BAGA. So really what you're looking for with the payload CID is a hash that starts with capital Q, M, and then a number of characters after that. I think if you're doing offline data transfer, sometimes the payload CIDs begin with an MAX or something along those lines. But generally, that's what you kind of want to look for. Those are the CIDs that are on the right track. And then this documentation, there's just a lot of the documentation has been extremely good, and huge improvements that we've seen from teams between 2.1 and 2.2. But as Dinesh mentioned, there are still a number of things that could make documentation much more usable. And so really, as we're entering the next phase, we encourage you to think about, if you're just thinking about this from the perspective of a data user, what are the things that they would really want to see? If you yourself, were looking at someone else's documentation because you wanted to download this data and use it yourself, what would you need to see in order to actually make that useful for you? And we do, grade the documentation when we're doing the judging process. So if you have great documentation, it gets reflected in the final results and awards as well. And then, yeah, Dinesh mentioned this as well, but some retrieval failures that we've seen for a number of different reasons. One specific recommendation that we've seen people in the community mention a lot, which is we highly recommend this as well, although we can't really make this a rule, but we basically recommend that every time that you're storing data with a miner, you should remember to keep the fast retrieval flag as true. And this ensures that when we try to retrieve your data, as long as the miner that you're working with has actually honored this flag and kept the data around, then we'll be able to retrieve the data in most cases. And so that'll also be helping you with your kind of like retrieval results when our team attempts to retrieve the data that's being stored on the network. So some of the immediate changes we'll be making to the 2.3 competition, we're definitely going to keep storage rewards as a concept. That's kind of the bulk of where the rewards comes from. As Dinesh mentioned, I think in this round it was like 125,000 fill plus like some of the leftovers from phase 2.1, which made it more than 140,000 Filecoin. So that's definitely the bulk of the rewards. For the next round, we'll be removing booster rewards because at this point, everyone in this competition has figured out how to store more than 50 gigabytes of data within a month or so. So we gave everyone in this round, we gave a booster reward, and next round we will be deprecating this particular prize. The other thing is we're really encouraging that if you do have any technical help requests, please use Lotus issues and discussions. We have a huge community support team on the Lotus side who is monitoring these discussion forums and making sure that they can get you your help as quickly as possible, essentially. So we encourage folks to start using the discussions on GitHub. There are some data sets that in 2.2, there were many teams that were storing these data sets, and one particular data set is Landsat 8. So for the next phase of the competition, we will probably be removing a few of the data sets that now have many copies on the Filecoin network, and encourage you to go out and search for more new data sets that are just different, so we can increase the diversity of what is being stored through the competition. This next immediate change was commonly requested by a lot of folks in the community as well, which is what's like sort of the cap on the maximum rewards that any individual team will get in this competition. We currently have this capped to 20%, although you'll see that no team actually got 20% of the total rewards. That was just in order to kind of try to distribute the rewards more fairly across all competitors. But in this next round, we'll be reducing this cap to 10%. So no individual team, no matter how much data they store, will get more than 10% of the total prize pool. And just remember, I think there may have been some confusion about this particular note in the last period, but everyone who participates is always in Slingshot, always gets something. So I think some folks were confused a little bit about how exactly this rule works, but everyone always who participates gets something. We just distribute the rewards proportionally among all participants based on how much data that they have stored. And then this other one is kind of interesting. So, Dinesh mentioned we had looked into some of the community complaints about people violating some of the rules. So looking into this a little bit, we discovered that, much further than just like the few complaints that we had received, a lot of people are finding very clever ways to basically store data with their own miners or organizations that they know very well and possibly are even, owners of. And so, this rule, we just decided for the next round, it wasn't really serving us anymore to keep this rule in place. So we're going to be removing this rule for 2.3, but we're still going to continue to, we think that there's a lot of value in storing data with other folks on the network and really like making sure that that storage market component of the Filecoin network is actually being exercised. And so we're probably going to start offering bonuses in the future to teams that are storing their data with other miners. Okay, and then the next big immediate change that we're making for 2.3 is that we're actually going to be pausing the competition for 2 weeks. We've learned a lot from just the accelerated pace of 2.2, and we want this chance to kind of regroup and work with all of you in the community to figure out a new, better structure that helps us more successfully accomplish the goals of the competition. And specifically, we'd love for you to submit any ideas that you may have about rules that could make this competition just like a million times better. So we created in the Slingshot repo an issue template, which you can use to surface like what you think, is maybe like a weakness in the current design of the competition and your proposed solution for how to improve that. And specifically, we're really interested in ideas to encourage better data architecture and processing, how to ensure this retrieval reliability that we're looking for so that anyone from any region in the world can retrieve the data that you're all storing. And you also, receive the benefit of that from the retrieval rewards and so on. And also how to encourage great data documentation. And lastly, just thinking how do we get other people to actually build on this data? We're stewing on some ideas for what a Slingshot hackathon could look like. A Slingshot hack track will be coming soon. But if you have any ideas for Slingshot 2.3 about how we can change the way the competition is structured to enable hackathons and other application developers to build on the data more easily, we would welcome your suggestions there as well. So highly encourage folks to take a look at the repo. This is your time, for the next 2 weeks. We're really opening the door to anyone who has ideas about how to design this. Many of you have been participating from the beginning of Slingshot, so I'm sure you have lots of ideas about how this could be done differently. And so we're really just opening this now to anyone in the community to participate and share your ideas. We'd love to hear them. And then the other thing to note too is because we are sort of pausing so that we can regroup and maybe change the competition structure slightly, you can keep storing data over these next 2 weeks, but it may not count for 2.3 if it doesn't fall within the new rules. So it's kind of like a bit of just beware. You can definitely keep storing your data on the network. And as long as you're, generally doing sensible things, most likely it will count for 2.3, but we're not going to make any guarantees at this point because we really want to preserve the flexibility to design the best competition possible. And so with that in mind, the new dates for folks to keep in mind, we'll be updating the website with all of this, but the reward deadline for 2.3 will be March 24th. So we're basically just pushing back all of the dates by 2 weeks. Okay, and then the last thing we wanted to announce today is that, we've seen a huge amount of really great goodwill in the community with folks helping each other out. There have been some really just awesome people, answering each other's questions, linking each other to the relevant documents, sharing information about events that are coming up and things like this. Also, even just some of the complaints that we've seen people submit is also just a really good example of community stewardship. I think people care about the outcome of this competition and care about fairness in the competition and so on. And so we've seen a lot of goodwill here. And so we wanted to formalize this a bit and create an opportunity for people to step up as official community stewards. And so we're going to open a lightweight application process next week to select 3 folks who are, official stewards of the competition, can help with continuing to provide the support in a little bit more official capacity, can help moderate. And also when it comes time to final judging for the competition, we'll be working with community stewards to help get their input on the final results as well. So we'll announce more details about this application process next week in the Slingshot announcements channel on Filecoin Slack. And that is it. Thank you so much for participating in Slingshot and all of the hard work that you've done so far. Congratulations to everyone. We'll be, right after this call is over, we'll be emailing everyone their final rewards for 2.2. But huge congrats. It's just kind of amazing. And we are happy to take any questions if folks have them over the next few minutes. So there's one question, which is the email going to be today? And yeah, the answer is yes. We're going to be emailing it out within the next hour or so. So you should hear from us very shortly. Okay, so Kimmy asks, why are we removing the self-sealing rule again? Yeah, so it's a really good question. This one is really tricky. The honest answer is that it's self-sealing is like a really difficult thing to properly enforce. And when we looked into it a little bit with some of the heuristics that some community members had provided, it basically became clear that kind of the majority of folks in the competition were finding very clever ways to subvert this rule, to be honest. And we didn't want to penalize for that, because that just didn't feel fair and felt like that was not really in the spirit of the competition. So we decided to just open it up. I mean, I think most people are kind of doing this anyways, and it really initially was kind of to help the folks who were having a really hard time finding miners to store with. We had seen that a lot in the previous phases, so we wanted to help protect some space for folks in that category, but most people have kind of figured out the way to do this now, and so like how to store data reliably on the network. And so we think that the rule is like not as necessary at this point. But the other thing also to mention is that we do have this program now that's called the Miner X program, and if folks are having trouble finding reliable miners to store with, or having miners to store with, there's like a batch of 30 miners who are participating in this program that you can ask us for introductions to, or to put us in the channels where they exist. And so they are constantly looking for data to accept and deals to accept. So that's another way to also make sure that you have other miners to store with. Dinesh, I saw you come on for a second. Do you want to add something there?
Yeah, I was just going to remind folks that like the Miner X Fellowship is a great way to find miners, and so the purpose is really to make the data available to everybody, whether it's self-sealed or otherwise. And so,
yeah,
in the past there weren't it was harder to find miners. I think the Miner X program actually improves that significantly. So even if you don't have miners, it should be easy to find miners. If you happen to be a miner, that's also a valid way to share data with the broader audience.
Yep, exactly. And then I think there's some follow-ups here as well. So those who did the self-dealing the last phase won't be penalized. No, so what we did actually, so again, as I mentioned, we found that the vast majority of participants were doing this essentially. But so we didn't think it was fair to like penalize essentially the entire competition. But what we're doing instead is that we gave rewards to folks who we basically thought were like behaving honestly. And so most of the folks who we think didn't do the self-sealing will see like a boost in their rewards. It's about like I think it's a 10% boost that we gave. And then there's a question about the 30% rule. And I think, yeah, also related questions. What about the percentage stored with the same miner? Can it be 100% with one miner? And so, no, we're not changing the 30% rule. So no, even if you decide to store data with your own miner, it still needs to be less than 30%. We may actually even change that, dropping that number further. So it has to be like more distributed. And then there's a question about when will the reward details be announced for Slingshot 2.2, and we'll be emailing that out shortly after this call ends. Okie dokie. I think that looks like those are all the questions that, okay, there's one more question here about publishing the results. So no, we won't be publishing the results. This time we did not publish the results for phase 1, and we won't be, we did for 2.1, we won't be doing that for 2.2. Okay, well, you know where to find us if you have any other questions. We are all on the Slingshot channel in Slack, and we'll be publishing this recording is being published, and we'll be emailing folks with results later today. Thank you for participating in Slingshot.